So yes, University of Westminster is where I live, and within it we have this active travel academy, which I can say more about later on if you're interested, but we run various events, and COVID-19 means that people from all around the world can attend them. So perhaps you could take account of that and sign up. Forgive me for starting a presentation on London with a little bit of governance, because it is actually relevant. England has its own characteristics in terms of transport management. I'll say a bit about that in a second. Greater London is the unit that perhaps is most important here, but it's important to recognise that London is made up of 33 local authorities, most of them are boroughs, and they have a certain amount of autonomy. So what is being done in response to COVID-19 is a combination of what is being mandated and funded by central government at the England level, what is being determined in Greater London, and what is being led by the boroughs, and that leads to quite interesting spatial differences. So at the England level, the message is don't use public transport, so nothing particularly remarkable here, but the three options being promoted at the central government level are walking, cycling, and car. And I hardly need to tell you that car is not likely to work in large numbers in a dense city such as London. So that is an immediate contrast between the national message and the one which is being put out in London. The other thing to say is that central government is pumping some money, perhaps rather less than people would like, and there's some argument as to how much it really is, but £225 million is the number being bandied around. This has been sent in London's case to Transport for London, who are the executive body responsible for running transport in London. And just to follow up on this point about London being a various place, here are the 33 local authorities, all of which have their own political colour, their own priorities, and are therefore responding to COVID-19 in distinct ways. The other thing to say is that Transport for London is the executive arm of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, and so its job, first and foremost, is to deliver the Mayor's transport strategy, which came out 2 years ago, and whose principal targets were, well, first to deliver this so-called healthy streets idea across the capital, and you may be familiar with this, and we can talk about it a bit more in the question and answer, but this is fundamental to the way London's transport is being managed now. In addition to this, the Mayor's transport strategy has a well-known target to achieve by 2040 80% of trips being made sustainably, and that's a considerable leap from where things are at the moment. Ambitious, deliverable, but I think, again, with the context of COVID-19, it helps to explain why we're seeing the things that we are. Anyway, so Transport for London is following the national line by telling people to avoid using public transport if possible, and pushing them towards walking and cycling instead. But as I said, not following the national line of encouraging car use. So it really has to be walking and cycling if it's not going to be public transport. And I don't need to tell you that public transport is still on offer. The problem is that its capacity is much reduced because of the need for social distancing, and that is why the message is please don't use it. And of course, it continues to be said that we should all be staying at home if possible too. So what Transport for London has decided to do is initiate something which it's calling street space, and there's quite a lot to this. I've put a set of items up in the list, but I'm going to read a few more things out because they deserve a little bit of explanation. The first item is car-free zones, and these are seemingly extremely ambitious, but exactly what they might be is not yet clear. The idea is that substantial chunks of central London might be made car-free in the sense of only walking and cycling, or only walking and cycling in buses, details to be ironed out, delivery vehicles only allowed in certain times of the day. And when and if this happens, it would be remarkable, it would be really quite significant, and there's no question that the Mayor is keen to set London out as a trailblazer in this regard. Perhaps slightly more standard is the cycle network, but what's happening here is that there were lots of activities taking place to get the cycle network happening and developing, and now a side activity is taking place to expand and introduce temporary strategic routes in addition to the network that was already happening. Footway widening for social distancing you will know about, but I'll just tell you that it has various bits in it. There's the footway widening itself, but there's also the idea of pinch point removal. They talk about bus stop relocation, which has happened in certain places, and changes to access, crossing improvements for pedestrians, signal controlled junction amendments. And then there's this additional list amongst the guidance that's been released about decluttering, reducing speed limits, this term restrictions on general traffic, which is tantalizing. I wonder what that might mean. Restrictions to parking and possibly making bus lanes 24-hour operation. So these are big tools available and being used to a greater or lesser extent. Going down the list, cycle parking has been mentioned, but there's not a great deal of news on that front. And I put in parentheses these final two items. Low traffic neighborhoods, which is a term you may know or may not. Essentially, it's about modal filtering, trying to reduce the amount of through motorized traffic in areas. And then school streets, which are an initiative a couple of years old now, aimed at reducing traffic in the vicinity of schools. Now, I put those in brackets because I get the feeling that Transport for London isn't putting a huge amount of emphasis on them at the moment for reasons I'll come back to, but they're on the list. So here is the relatively recent map released by Transport for London of its street space plan for cycle routes, and you have to try to blank out the extensive range of underground lines, which are most of the colours on the map. The purple lines are the new street-based routes, and the green lines are existing cycle routes. So if you have a chance to study this at your leisure, you'll see that there's quite a lot on this map, and it's being developed in real time. And in fact, if you should have the chance, tune into next week's Cycling at Tea Time event, which is taking place as part of the Active Travel Academy, where we shall hear from someone at Transport for London who's leading this work, if you want to find out more. Here is perhaps the most well-known of the interventions. This is the cycle lane that's been introduced on Park Lane, which is a very major thoroughfare in central London. But it's striking that in this image, the one cyclist I can see is not making use of the cycle lane, perhaps for good reason, I don't know. But you can see, in contrast with Barcelona, we've got some wands to aid separation, and we'll come on to what's being done elsewhere to do that. So here is a footway widening scheme. Again, people aren't walking in the carriageway, but the space has been created to enable them to do so. And as you can see, it's not a particularly pretty affair. Temporary hoardings have been used. These are the sorts of things that generally surround roadworks. It doesn't look good. And I think a concern is that it's creating a degree of severance in that where previously you would have been able to cross the road if it was safe to do so, now you have to go to find a place where the barriers are not in order to be able to get into the road. Perhaps the most ambitious stuff that we're beginning to see is to be found in the more go-ahead boroughs. This is in the borough of Hackney, which was very keen to put a marker down for what's being done in the context of COVID-19. And here, Broadway Market, which is a shopping street, is now closed to vehicular traffic. This is the kind of most exciting stuff, not being done widely in London, but there are these beacon examples. And this is one of the more interesting cases. This is a contraflow arrangement for pedestrians. So the idea is that if you're walking north across the bridge, you use the left hand, and if you're walking south across the bridge, use the right hand. And this seems to make perfectly good sense. This idea of staying on the left, because we drive on the left in the UK, ought to reduce the degree of conflict between road users and pedestrians. It's not being done very widely, which is why I included it, because I thought it was quite a striking example. And in terms of how it's being done, this is from my home borough of Islington. Various boroughs have done this. They've introduced, this is using a tool called Commonplace, mechanisms for citizens to express their own thoughts concerning what would be useful and what would be desirable. Here's someone saying that they need to do something about the zebra crossing between Blackstock Road and Summerfield Road. And as you can see by the number of icons, lots and lots of other ideas have been introduced. So it's then the job of the council to assess all of these various contributions as part of working towards some kind of set of interventions. Islington hasn't been the quickest, it must be said, to take action, but it has recently launched this initiative. And this image, I think, is striking because it demonstrates how some of this stuff is being done very rapidly and it doesn't necessarily work terribly well. This is from Deptford High Street, which is in South London. And as you can see, there are some plastic hoardings which were intended to create successful footway widening, but it's suggested that they should have been filled with water. They weren't, so delivery drivers have move them in order to put their vans where they need to take things to and from the shops. So it's not all been a massive success, shall we say. So one of the questions I was asked to address as part of this was the extent to which the interaction is taking place between responding to COVID-19 on the one hand and decarbonisation as a longer term, perhaps ultimately more important objective. And my view on this would be that you have a Venn diagram. There is a lot which is relevant both to responding to COVID-19 and to decarbonisation. And those are the things which I think Transport for London and the boroughs have had most success implementing so far. But I think where it gets difficult is in the areas that are not in that intersection. For example, I'm not saying I agree with it, but our Secretary of State for Transport has suggested that you might want to go to a car showroom and buy yourself an electric car in these times where social distancing is important. That's clearly not in the intersection, at least not in my opinion. And equally, some of the things I mentioned, such as school streets and low traffic neighbourhoods, desirable as they are from a decarbonisation point of view, don't naturally sound to me like they're essential in order to respond to COVID-19. They don't do any harm, they may do some good, but they're not anything like as relevant as, for example, providing safe cycle routes and opportunities for social distancing on the footway. So those sorts of things represent to me some of the challenges. Let me just refer back to the questions that I was asked to address so that I don't miss them. I've told you about the adaptations that have been used. I was asked which have proven to be successful, and I think the answer is it's too early to say. Some things have patently not worked already, in the case of Deptford High Street, for example. Some things are not being taken up in any large number, but it's probably too early to judge whether they will be in due course. We're likely to be social distancing for some time, of course. And then I'm asked, to what extent do you think these interventions will last after the emergency? And I think that's a glorious and very relevant question. The answer again is we're not really sure. I think that things that are relevant to decarbonisation probably have a better chance of lasting, provided they are palatable to the wider community. And that, of course, is the challenge, because people are being told to drive their cars. People are being told that public transport isn't available. And as a consequence, they might respond quite badly to seeing road space being reallocated away from motorised traffic, however good the justification. So I think we'll have to watch and see. I think those were the questions I needed to answer. So I shall leave it there. Those are my details. At the bottom are links to the Active Travel Academy itself and to the journal that we have just launched, in which I'm delighted to say Esther is a member of the editorial board for. So if you're on the academic side and you are writing material on the subject of active travel, I do hope you will consider submitting to our journal. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.